Okay, well, welcome to Higher Education, the podcast that explores career development in public education. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Sergo, and in each episode, we explore different aspects of career development, interviewing experts, and sharing practical advice. Today, we will be exploring how to manage stressful workplaces. Thank you for tuning in to our November episode of Higher Education. I really think this topic will be super helpful to our listeners because we know that while public education is extremely rewarding as a field, it can also be very demanding. And when you pair the pressures of really trying to care for our students and stakeholders with just walking through the world and being a human being and living our lives, there's a lot of stress that comes with navigating those experiences. So today we're going to explore what this looks like in our work environment and some strategies. And I hope that we'll hear from our guests some insightful advice and guidance, practical tips to help you navigate stress and enhance your well-being and ultimately thrive in our world of education. So to guide us through this subject, we have invited two guests to the show today. First, we have Dr. Paul Lebo, our Chief Operating Officer. Dr. Lebo began his professional career as an Army officer, serving in several leadership, command, and staff positions. And after leaving the military, he served in a variety of staff and management positions in several government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, and the U.S. Department of Education. He comes to FCPS most recently from the U.S. Department of Education, where he was Deputy Chief Administration Officer for federal student aid. And now in FCPS, he has the chief responsibility of overseeing 8 different operational divisions. So he is definitely an expert in navigating a lot. And certainly, Dr. Lebo, as we are recording this on Veterans Day, I want to also thank you for your service. We also have Sam Wilt joining us today. Sam is currently one of our school therapists, and she comes with a wealth of knowledge and experience when it comes to mental and behavioral health. After obtaining her master's degree in social work, Sam has worked as a therapist in a variety of different settings, ranging from more traditional psychiatric settings to crisis intervention. After joining FCPS, she's worked as a social worker and as a community agency school services or CAS worker, where she's provided direct services to students and families throughout Frederick County. During her time in FCPS, she's also developed a number of professional development courses, such as Stressed Out, Supporting Yourselves and Others in Difficult Times. And she's been doing work around managing stress for a long time. We're lucky to have her insight today. So before we dive into today's topic, you can see we've got two outstanding guests. I'd love to have them unlock their fast facts. So Dr. Lebo, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your perspective on today's topic, managing stress at work?
Sure. Well, thanks for the kind introduction. I think the thing I'm most excited for with this conversation is honestly just having an open and honest dialogue. As you shared a little bit about my background, I've had the good fortune of working in a variety of organizations, and stress exists for leaders in all organizations and all organization types. So there's while there are certainly some uniquenesses to public education, the uniquenesses of stress are not something that's just owned by public education. And so I think the willingness to have an honest conversation about how stress impacts work and some strategies that we can do to help that in the workplace are what I'm excited for. And I'm excited to have my fellow guest, Ms. Wilt, on here as well. I feel a little underqualified in dealing with her, so I'm excited to hear her perspective as well.
Likewise. Well, we appreciate you being here and excited to dive into this topic with you. Now, Sam, let's move over to you. Let's unlock your fast facts as well. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your thoughts on our topic today?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me here. I definitely appreciate getting to be a part of this. And I'm, just as much interested to hear what Dr. Lebo has to say as well. But hi, I'm Sam Wilt. I work as an FCPS itinerant therapist. In a nutshell, I provide school-based therapy for students as a related service on their APs. And I've spent my career so far working with families and directly, especially with kids and teens, both as a social worker and an educator, which kind of has given me an interesting perspective from different angles of what people are going through. In both roles, I've always seen one of the key components of my role to be like helping to support people as they manage the stressors of life. And I make it a point to simplify stress management as much as possible and offer ways that anyone can utilize strategies. When it comes down to it, we live in a time where stressors just continue to grow and grow. And no matter where you turn, you find people who are struggling, whether in their individual lives, within their communities, or with society at large. Um, so I've definitely worked on a lot with presentations of working through stress and how to manage it. I actually wrote a book earlier this year, a kid's book about stress. And I'm really excited today to talk about the different types of stress and to recognize that while stress isn't all bad, experiencing stress with the right mix of supports can help us to grow. But that we, need to, above all else, be taking care of ourselves as we go through these.
Well, I'm excited to hear about your book as well for children, because I think, one of the things that we're going to start talking about are the different kinds of stress. And I think, when we hear the word stress, we always tend to think of negative. But even good things, even positive things can come with stress. If you've ever planned a wedding or a life celebration or anything like that, even good things or a big trip, those all kinds, all create stressful feelings inside of us. And so let's start by kicking off our discussion, really defining stress and the different kinds of stress that staff could experience. So we know that stress is essentially a mind-body connection. It's your body's reaction to a challenging or demanding experience, whether it's good or bad. And it's sort of the tension that arises in our bodies in those experiences. So there are 4 different kinds of stress. In the research, we have acute stress, chronic stress. We have what they call positive stress and distress. And so acute stress is sort of something that we think of as happening in the moment. It's a specific incident or a trigger happens, and you feel stressed, the event occurs, and typically some of the stress dissipates. I know a lot of people feel that way before they're giving a big presentation or before a job interview. And so that's like it comes quick, and then typically it resolves. And so, that can be acute, that can start suddenly. Then you've also got sort of more chronic stress, which can be acute stress that initially doesn't go away, or is just pervasive. It just happens every day. We know many people experience this with, housing insecurity or food insecurity or whatever other challenges. So that's the kind of stress we think can really make someone sick, right? It's chronic and there's no relief. Positive stress is sort of things that are supposed to be good, but can also be stressful. And we gave some examples as I introduced this topic. And then, of course, distress, right? So we all think of that as that negative, debilitating feeling of just completely being overwhelmed. It can come from chronic stress, but it also is experienced differently. And, the main difference is sort of our reaction and response to that. So Sam, you have experience working with a variety of different individuals and stakeholders who are all experiencing different kinds of stress. I would love to hear your thoughts. How do you see these kinds of different stressors manifesting themselves in the lives of our employees, our educators, our support staff, and the folks that you're working with?
One thing I've noticed is that everything has a sort of ebb and flow to it. We all have busy seasons, times in our lives that are almost unmanageable. But even within the chaos of incredibly stressful times, there are moments of lightness where you can take a moment and breathe before jumping back in. Education, especially, is a field where we're constantly managing numerous inputs throughout the day. And we, I think, tend to sometimes overlook some of the small stressors or consider them to not be as important. But it's important to remember that when we don't manage the small stressors as they arise, they tend to build up and become a more chronic problem. And I see that a lot in working, with my colleagues and that sort of thing. So it's important to be aware of the way that all stressors impact our lives, regardless of how big or small they are. When they pile up, they impact what we call the window of tolerance, which is your zone where you can kind of be almost like a comfort zone where you're calm, cool, collected, able to manage things or regulated in general. In difficult times, that window shrinks and it's harder to stay in it. So, making sure that you're taking care of yourself and able to keep up with demands as they come through. Another thing about educators is that we do a lot of stress comparison, and we tend to think, oh, I shouldn't be reacting this way, or oh, somebody else has it worse than me. But stress is such a personal, individual kind of thing that every single stressor is different from person to person. And it doesn't do us any good to compare ourselves to one another because there are so many variables that go into it. All you can do is look at your own responses and be curious about your own reactions and work to support yourself.
You know, I love what you said because it reminds me, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a video of Kara Lawson, who's the Duke women's basketball coach. And she has this inspirational speech I think she was giving to her team, but it sort of went viral, and it's called Handle Hard Better. And it just talks about this idea that I think sometimes we've convinced ourselves that stress is a bad thing. And if you're feeling it, you've failed yourself, or that you can't handle something. And she talks about this idea of, people keep saying, I'm going to wait for this and it'll get easier. I'm going to wait for that and it'll get easier. And it's like, well, none of it gets easier. We just learn to handle hard better. And so what you said really reminded me of that, about that ebb and flow, and that you have to always be prepared that things are going to feel stressful and you're going to get stronger at managing those stressors.
And to know that nothing is permanent, everything's changing. So even in the hardest times, things are going to shift.
Yeah, so true. And Dr. Lebo, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You oversee operations, lots of stressors, transporting students, making sure our facilities are running. What are the types of stress you see in your staff? How they may be different, than perhaps a classroom educator or a building administrator. You're working with a number of different folks we don't often think about sometimes when you talk about sort of how hard it is to be an educator, but they are a critical member of our team. How do you see these stressors manifest themselves with your team members?
Yeah, and so as I heard Sam talk, I actually was hearing a lot of the same similarities in terms of some of the things where they start to manifest are the things that we can't control, right? So, oh my gosh, we show up at a building and there's water leaking from the ceiling because we had a condensate line, that started to back up into the pan, and now we've got an entire room that's inaccessible, and now I've got to tell the principal so she can move classes, and I got to figure out a way to do all this work and try to minimize noise because we're trying to deliver instruction all at the same time. Just sort of one example, right? And then you start to internalize a lot of that stress because you realize you've now put stress on others, all of which was oftentimes unavoidable, right? And so it's going to happen. And I think one of the things that we have to remember routinely is we can't let that impact our response to those items, right? You're going to feel an immediate pressure. That's normal. I think I hinted at this when we talked about having the conversation of, I think it's important that we have these honest conversations because for whatever reason in our society, I feel like there's this, it's almost taboo to talk about stress in the workplace. It affects all of us. And so let's just own it, right? And say what it feels like. It is, regardless of your position in this organization, you have stressors, and we, as much as possible, you can't snap at your coworkers, right? Like you're going to start to internalize and have those physical symptoms that can really start to manifest themselves in how you're responding to whatever that situation is. And so I think really to get at the question, on my side of the house and the operations teams, we're seeing many of the same responses that people have. It's those physical and those emotional and behavioral symptoms that are the outward sign of the stressors that we're feeling inside. It's just a different reason or a different cause for those stressors.
Yeah, I love what you said about that because it reminded me, I remember when I was a new assistant principal and someone's like, are you stressed out? And I was like, no, I actually feel really fine, but I have hives all over. It's like, or like my hair was falling out. It was like, I was like, up here, I wasn't stressed, or I didn't give myself permission to call it that. Well, my body was telling me something very different. And so, I think that's such a good point. So it's like this idea that stress is a normal part of the experience. And we have to be able to name it and recognize it, but we also need to have some strategies, right? So I'd love to, Dr. Lebo, to go back to you. to take this a little further. So, what are the strategies that you try to help coach or offer to staff when they are feeling stressed? How do you help them recognize that what they're saying or doing is a manifestation of that and how they can sort of recenter themselves?
So a couple of thoughts on that. I think one thing in particular that I have found helpful is to have a series or a group of colleagues that you know very well and can help you sort of check your emotions, but also know you well enough that they can recognize when you're stressed and can come to you and say, hey, you're acting a little different. Everything okay? Anything I can help with? Anything you need to talk through? So I find that exceptionally important. And if we can talk through leadership and related stressors there, certainly everybody should have a colleague, regardless of what level of the organization that you're in, that you feel comfortable and they feel comfortable coming to you. And I'll just talk about our boss for a second, Dr. Sergo, with Dr. Dyson, who is exceptional, I feel, at managing stress. She comes to us as her cabinet to be able to bounce ideas off of, to check her thinking at times, I think, when things might be tough. And she's really set that stage for us to do that internally. And I sort of hope that we're doing that with our teams as well, because it really goes to the culture of the organization. And so I do think that's really one exceptionally critical thing for you to have is a group of colleagues. The next thing is getting to know yourself and your own body, and recognizing those symptoms, for lack of a better term, right? Like, I know when I start to get stressed that the tightness in the back of my neck really starts to get really tense. And I've got this, in particular on the right side, I feel this tension that starts to go down my arm. And that's like a telltale sign of, okay, something is bothering you more than maybe it ought to, or you need to think about this in a different way. That's just how my body reacts to it. So, sort of recognizing that and calling out, which might be really my theme of going back to just owning it and understanding it. And then, I'm not the medical professional, but I certainly have been around enough folks who have it. It can manifest itself in so many different ways. You can't go back to comparing yourself. Maybe you handle stress better than I do in this situation, but we all have stressors and we all handle it differently, and that's okay. You just have to be able to recognize it and have a support group that can help you recognize it when maybe you haven't recognized it yourself.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what stress looks like for you, right? So when, for me, while I may not lose my cool, I don't really tend to get agitated. Have learned, having lived with myself for a long time and worked in sort of, very significant demanding positions, I've learned that when I am becoming almost over responsive, like where I'm like sort of over communicating and, sending lots of emails, and I'm sort of in a frenetic way, that I'm stressed because I feel like I've got to clear things out of my inbox that, some of my inbox can stress me out sometimes. So it's like, wait a minute, you're being too reactive and too responsive. So it's not only like knowing your physical symptoms, but knowing what your stress behaviors look like. So you're like, I'm stressed. This is why this is showing up. I think those are great ideas. Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are some strategies that you recommend people use to sort of notice and pay attention to stress when it's showing up for them?
So, yeah, I really love, Dr. Label, you talked about having your community and kind of relying on those that you're working with. And I think that is really incredibly important. And noticing, the different physical sensations. One thing, anyone who's taken a class with me or seen me present has probably been subjected to one of my check-ins. It's like my little trademark thing, where I think it's really important to take a moment whenever you can to check in with yourself and really kind of assess how you're feeling. You can ask yourself how you're feeling, what's contributing to that, See if there's any small adjustments that you can make to improve your current well-being in the moment. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing, hey, the way that I'm sitting isn't very comfortable. I just need to shift a little bit, and it can change so much about your current experience. Um, and along that line, check-ins go hand in hand with mindfulness and grounding techniques. When you take the time to breathe, to notice the world around you, to remain present in the moment, you can better understand yourself and begin to sort out the struggles that you're experiencing in your life, whether you're noticing them in the moment or not. And sometimes that can be as simple as taking a few intentional deep breaths, tapping into your senses, noticing how the air feels on your skin or how your feet feel on the floor, things like that. I also really like guided breathing or guided meditation to help get to a place where you can kind of be present and understand what's going on within. Those kinds of techniques, they create an opportunity to let go of your current responsibilities and kind of press pause for a moment. Often we're so busy that we tend to ignore what we're actually feeling until it becomes unbearable. Like those pains and those, different moments where we realize that we're kind of losing control of ourselves. Um, I do want to say also, though, that sometimes it can be really hard to understand what we're feeling. It's not uncommon to start trying to check in with yourself and to find that it's not so simple as just kind of taking a look and figuring it out. There's some really great resources out there that link the physical sensations to emotions, which you can use to kind of understand where you are. I've seen like body maps of where different feelings are in the body. Google is a fantastic thing for a lot of these. And then some people find just having like a non-guided journal where you just kind of write whatever's on your mind and kind of just let your almost subconscious brain take over, helps you to work out things that you're processing that you may not even be fully aware of. And then the last thing I just want to kind of touch on is there's a technique that I really love, and both to check in and also to kind of start working on those little adjustments, is spiraling up. When things get tough, when we have a bad day, things tend to like pile on, and it's like every little thing just adds. And you can actually turn it around the other way and spiral up, where to change the trajectory of your day or your mood or, what's going on, start with just the little things like, what in this moment can I do to help myself feel good? Um, and, find that can even shift your perspective moving forward too.
You guys, both of you gave some wonderful advice on both like recognizing when you are feeling stressed, sort of checking in. And we started to talk a little bit about some strategies. So I wanted to go a bit deeper with that conversation. How do we deal with stress? And I think sort of the elephant in the room, particularly in our field, in public education, and just really walking through the world right now, is that you can't avoid all stress, right? And so I'm really a big fan of the 4 A's approach to stress management. And so the first A is avoid, right? If you can, you should avoid things that make you stressful. But that the reality is you cannot walk through the world avoiding every stressor, right? Some people get really stressed by things that are life responsibilities, right? Like parenting, and going to work and commuting and all of those things. So you can't always avoid that, but you could do the second A, which is alter. And so altering is sort of making a change that sort of makes the experience less stressful. So for me, mornings are very stressful in my house. I've got to get my 2 kids off to school, got to get myself off to work, sort of make sure everything is running. And so I sort of do everything the night before so that the morning, I alter my morning in that way by preparing a little bit differently. The third is accept, which is sort of just say, to your point, Sam, I think you said earlier, the sort of basic tenet, right? Accept the things you cannot change. And so I think deciding where you want to put your mental energy and effort, is it in fighting something that is unchangeable, or is it in sort of reconciling it and then maybe working around it? And the last is, I guess, just to that point, adapting. There are sometimes where we stress ourselves out because we have really high standards for our work or ourselves, because we aspire to achieve something or to acquire something or do something different. And so, sometimes I know it's helpful for me to decide when I'm stressed, which of those 4 A's do I want to lean on? So I'd love to hear from each of you, your favorite strategy that you use for yourself. And so Sam, we'll start with you this time. What is in your personal toolkit that you use to help manage stress?
I feel like this is going to sound really cliche, but bear with me. Mindset. I feel like having the perspective and the way that you show up for yourself is really critical. Often, when we find ourselves in distressful situations, we tend to be critical of ourselves. We tear ourselves down. We make it harder on ourselves. We blame ourselves for getting into situations or for the way that we're handling our stress. And instead, if you approach yourself from a place of kindness and curiosity, and that's the way to kind of start to work through some things and take some of that weight of blame and shame off of it. When things get difficult, that's not the time to buckle down and power through. The key is actually to be graceful and kind with yourself and to be curious about why you're responding the way that you are and approach your thoughts and actions with understanding instead of judgment. And to really I guess one thing that I feel like I always come back to is the little things, like what little tiny adjustments can you start making that are going to improve your current state of being?
Yeah, I love this. I love little fun words, and I heard you. What you said reminded me of this word that I've shared before, which is you should try to be flossum, which is you have flaws and you're still awesome. So it's like try to be flossum today, right? Try to just sort of be the best version of yourself, but no one is expecting any one of us to be perfect, right? So I love
Yeah.
that.
And perfection
Dr.
doesn't exist. It's not a thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And we have high standards for ourselves. And so it's not, sometimes our own standards are stressful. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't have them, but we also have to sort of manage them in a way that's functional and productive. Dr. Lebo, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's your go-to strategy that you use for yourself when you're stressed out?
So I do like, what Sam said about mindset. I really do agree with that wholeheartedly. It's half of the battle is how you enter the conversation in terms of what that impact is, not only personally, but with the team that you support. I think some of the more practical things that I focus on is I really think that the ability to de-stress starts with you and your personal self, and you have to find that, right? So in whatever way that manifests itself for you in terms of a healthy lifestyle. So things like regular exercise and sleeping well and eating well. And look, I'm not good at those a lot of the time, right? So please don't take any of my things as like I'm some perfectionist out there. But these are things that I almost feel a little silly at times. When you're feeling stressed, and I think, gosh, what is going on? I'm like, well, you haven't taken any time for you, and you haven't walked lately, and you haven't been eating right, and you're not sleeping. It's like, so some of those things that are really kind of simple, but you have to remind yourselves of those because the stress continues to compound itself. One of the other things that I like during the workday is, in particular, and I know our educators whose schedule is a little bit more managed than maybe yours and mine are, Dr. Sergo, is sometimes you just need to take a break. Take 5 minutes, stop whatever you're doing, walk up and down the hall. If you're able on a day like it is today when we're recording this, it's 70 degrees outside, go get some vitamin D and some sun, and then just reframe yourself, because problems that you might be dealing with just sort of have a different look when you can step away for a few seconds. And I think that one is probably the most effective in my book, but you really have to work hard to remind yourself. You've just been working so hard and your head's down, your nose to the grindstone, and then it's like, hey, back away for a second, take a breath, pull away from it, and then re-enter the conversation. And then the last piece is not being afraid to ask for help. And I think too oftentimes in our professional life, something either gets thrown at us or we find ourselves in the midst of something, and for whatever reason, we're reluctant to ask a colleague to support us, to maybe delegate that if we're a leader of a team. But that's another thing. None of us are expected to be able to do everything. And so, just saying, hold on, I've got too much on my plate right now. Either I can reprioritize, or maybe I've got a team member who would excel at a new opportunity and let them kind of run with something different as well. And so that, especially in leadership roles, I think that's one that we forget oftentimes, is there are others on our team that can help. And look, I'll say it in FCPS, we've got some phenomenal members of this team, and I have yet to interact with somebody who, when you've gone to them with a need for assistance, they haven't been willing to jump up and help you. So those are sort of my three quick things.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such a good point, which is it connects with, so our podcast topic in October was about emotional regulation at work, right? And so it's sort of these two topics go together. So, if you really want to take care of yourself, listen to this podcast while you're taking a walk and you get your sunshine, but also, it's permission to feel, permission, to feel stress. It's what you do with that in the work environment that is sort of the place where I know certainly we see people struggle. It's okay to feel stressed. And when you're in an acute situation, and if you've ever spent time with a dysregulated adult or a dysregulated child, you know what this looks like. And so, the rule of thumb is that when someone is elevated, you have to keep yourself calm and steady. And so, it can be hard to do that. So that takes us to a listener question. We have a question from a teacher today. And she says, or he, I'm not sure which one it is, I've been feeling overwhelmed with the increasing demands of lesson planning, grading, and student behavior issues. Last week, I found myself staying late every night just to keep up. It's starting to affect my motivation and energy. What specific strategies can I use to manage this stress and create a more balanced approach to my work, especially when it feels like there is never enough time? Oh, to the proverbial, lives of an educator, about this tension. So, Sam, would you like to kick us off with a response to this teacher?
Sure. And oh my goodness. First, I want to start off by saying to this teacher, I hear you. And I'm sure that this is something that many people are going through right now, especially as we work our way through term two. This is when things start to get harder, and there aren't as many school breaks in the October, November kind of sludge that we find ourselves in, but we're getting there. But you are absolutely right. There is never enough time. So my initial reaction, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Make sure that you are creating a clear delineation between your home life and your work life. Keep that separation as much as you can. Will there be times that you need to stay late? Sure. That's just a fact of most people's jobs, unfortunately. Should it be the norm? Absolutely not. As educators, our jobs are never done. There is always more that can be done, and make sure that you're prioritizing the must-do tasks and schedule everything else for when you have an opportunity to really give it your full focus. Once you've worked a full day, your brain is simply not functioning at the same level that it was first thing in the morning, and you're doing yourself a disservice by staying late and trudging on. I love to create a routine around updating my own to-do list at the end of the day when I realize that, okay, my day is over, I'm not being as productive. Or, if I have a certain time that I kind of set aside a few minutes at the end of the day to look at my to-do list, because it's never empty, it's always there. So, you can write down everything on your mind that you need to accomplish, anything that you wanted to get to and just didn't get to. Even rank or highlight certain tasks if they're more critical than others, and then set it down, walk away. Leave it on your desk and come back to it in the morning. There's very little in our day-to-day work that's so urgent that it can't wait for a clear head in the morning. Now, I'm going to also say, as a social worker, the mandatory, of course, if you have concerns about a student safety or something like that, please take care of that first. But most other things can typically wait till the next morning. And once you get home, then focus on being present in the moment, practice some grounding techniques if you need to, give yourself that distance from work so that you're capable of getting some quality rest and coming back to it the next day.
I see. I think it's such great advice, particularly around this idea that, on your best day, even if you're not giving 100%, it's still your best day. I always say, kids don't know whether or not you wrote a full lesson plan out. They know whether or not you've made them feel seen, whether you've made them feel capable, whether they've had an engaging lesson. And so, it's also a good idea to sort of have some go-to routines and instructional experiences that you can still use. It'll bring the rigor and the quality to it, but not everything has to be perfect every day. And so, even if you ask a friend or a colleague for help, people are always willing to jump in. This is a universal experience. Dr. Lebo, do you have any thoughts around someone who might be struggling to balance their time? What might you suggest?
Well, I don't have much to add to what Sam said because she really hit the nail on the head on that, in particular with boundaries. I think the only things I would add are doing sort of an internal risk assessment in terms of what's the impact if I don't do this task now, or if I wait, or what if I just don't do it at all, right? And you touched on that a second ago, Dr. Sergo, with at the end of the day, if the kids were safe and they, felt heard and they, had a good day in the classroom, did you have a bad day? I'm going to argue that the answer was no, and you probably didn't get to all the things on your list. But you know what? My list grows every day with all the things that I didn't get to because some other thing came up. But if I felt like I gave my best, like you talked about, then it's a good day. It's a good way to end it. Use those strategies of sort of making yourself a list and prioritize for the next day, and let it be. I love that sort of as the ending thought on this piece is write it down and just let it stay at work. Don't drag that home with you to the greatest extent possible. So you can be, frankly, more present the next day when you come back.
You know what you said just reminded me of something. I remember being a new principal, and I gave myself permission I had one long day a week. And so I said, I made a decision that, Wednesdays I was going to work late. And it was like, and so there were things I learned, just like what you said reminded me of that, Dr. Lebo. I used to say to myself, that's a Wednesday task. Like, so let's say it was something more elaborative. Maybe it was, I'm dating myself. It was writing report card comments, or, it was like, that's a Wednesday task. And so what happened is I would say, okay, I leave at the end of my duty day, Monday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday is my long day. And, Tuesday I reserve for my team planning or whatever it is. But, also give yourself permission to not make every day feel like Wednesday in that example, and sort of how you can sort of bundle it. That your suggestion made me think of that. All right, well, we are getting to the end of our show today, and we want to take an opportunity. First, I want to thank our guests. We've been doing a fall series for higher education, which is our podcast. We started in September with establishing work-life balance. In October, we did self-awareness and regulating emotions at work. And you are closing out our fall semester with really this topic of managing stressful situations. And so this has been a really wonderful bookend to this fall series. And, Dr. Lebo, Sam, I want to thank you so much, both for taking the time to come and chat with me and share with us everything you can about this important topic, about managing stress at work, and such a crucial topic in our world, and certainly in public education. So for closing comments, sort of elevator speech in one sentence or less, if you could offer one piece of advice to someone who's aiming to level up in their chosen field or career, what do you think it would be? Dr. Lebo, can you go first?
All right, here's the quick elevator speech. I think it is, don't be afraid to embrace continuous learning and opportunities, and never be afraid to take on a new challenge.
Great sage advice. Sam will give you the last word.
I don't know that I can be quite as concise, but I think definitely set realistic expectations for yourself and don't sacrifice living your life now to create a future that you want. If you focus too much on the future and where you want to go, you're missing out on the ability to enjoy where you are right now. By all means, grow, achieve, do what you want to do, move forward, but make sure that above all else that you're taking care of you.
That's right. If you spend so much time thinking about the future, you're going to miss the present. Great advice, and certainly something I will take to heart. Well, that wraps up today's episode of Higher Education. We hope you found our exploration of this topic meaningful and supportive for you, finding some strategies, maybe some new ideas and ways to both acknowledge that stress exists in our lives, but also have a plan for managing it just a little bit better in the future. Please check out our podcast and supporting resources online. And until next time, we'll be back in January with another topic. Keep thriving in your careers, and don't forget to share this podcast.